Thank you. That ends the first part of our evening service, and over to Reva for your drosha. Thank you, Reva.
Thank you, Marianne. I think, Jacob, you can see I'm having great trouble tonight. It looks like the signal's very bad in our area. So may I ask if everyone can hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Good. So if that disappears, please forgive me. All right. Our parasha tonight is Vayishlach. And it follows after the one last week, which was Vayishlach, and it's all about the life and the generation of Jacob. And tonight, we don't read the Torah, we do that tomorrow, and we look to see in the narrative and in the story, is there a message, is there a moral, is there something we can learn from human behavior as shown in the Torah to what we have today. And I think I did mention, I'd like to mention quickly again that we are named after Jacob. His name became Israel when he struggled with an angel. Maybe that was with himself, his own conscience, or his wish to be a better person. And this is very interesting. In this parasha, it is 22 years have passed since Jacob fled from his brother Esau. You'll remember that Jacob deceived his father Isaac and actually stole Esau's blessing, and Esau threatened to murder him. On the advice of his mother Rebekah, he ran away. So he's now fled from his brother Esau. Penniless and alone, 22 years have passed since Esau swore his revenge for what he saw as the theft of a blessing. Now the brothers are to meet again. In the interim, of course, Jacob has married both two wives, Leah and Rachel, and together with his wives and their maidservants, he's had many, many children, and he's amassed great flocks and tribes. And he has decided to move on. And however, he decides as he's moving towards the promised land and his generation, that he must once again contact Esau, his brother, who threatened to kill him. And we're going to look at this tonight and think, why did he do this? And what have we to learn?
Reva, your sound's gone.
To react. But he knew one thing, he had to meet him again on his way, on his journey to the promised land. And the Torah tells us a very interesting about Jacob's mindset, which I think reflects the exact mindset of all of us today. Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. The fear is understandable, but his response contains an enigma. Why the duplication? Why fear and distress? What is the difference? Is there a difference? Well, you know, in Judaism, there are many, many different answers to the same question. And the different streams of Judaism and the different rabbinical thinkers will all be different, and again in the different eras. Now, the Midrash, which is the ancient oral wisdom, sees this as Jacob sees this as being afraid that he himself would be killed, and the fear rather as having to kill another person, which is against our Torah, except you may kill another person if it is in defense of your own life. Isn't that interesting? Things we are struggling with today. Self-defense is permitted in Jewish law. If Esau were to try to kill Jacob, would not Jacob be justified in fighting back, if necessary, at the cost of Esau's life? So we have commentaries now by different rabbis in different eras, and you will see that they in themselves differ greatly. And it is up to each one of us to decide in our own era how we would confront this. So one rabbi, Shabbatai Bas, comments on the commentary of Rashi as well, and one might argue that Jacob should surely not be distressed at the possibility of killing Esau, because if someone comes to kill you, you may kill them back. On the other hand, there is another principle at stake that Jacob may have been worried about, with this contradiction in the text, that he was both afraid and scared, and he was thinking twice and twice. The rules of defense and self-defense are not an open-minded permission to kill. These are laws restricting what is nowadays referred to as collateral damage. And this is why I chose to discuss this tonight, that the Torah, by actually saying he was afraid and distressed, by using two different verbs, which could mean the same thing or which could mean something different. The sages of our era are looking at this terribly seriously, because the whole point of Judaism is you have a choice whether you want to align yourself with a very strict Orthodox, which interprets this as they would have 1,000 years ago or more, or whether you'd like to reassess it, as many modern Orthodox and particularly progressive rabbis are doing today. And so this now has become the dilemma of collateral damage in terms of a war. The killing of innocent civilians, because Jacob could have been worried with this word's distress, not only against Esau, because if Esau came to kill him, he would have had a right according to Jewish law to kill him. But what happens when Esau, who's come to meet him with 400 people, 400 men, and Jacob, what is he to do now with his tribe? Do they fight? There will be a war between the people. So it's not only the lives of Esau and Jacob that are at stake. There are lives of the people, innocent people, who are with both of them, and there are the lives of the army of each of them. And that brings us straight to today's question of collateral damage. So let's see what great rabbis of today think. There is another possibility to explain Jacob's fear. Namely, you could accept the Midrash, which says it's justified to kill someone and not take it further. Perhaps Jacob was distressed at the possibility of being forced to kill, even if it was justified. Have we thought of that? He was distressed at the thought of having to kill even someone who was coming to kill him. Is that justified? We are encountering here, in this drosha, in today's era, in the light of what's happening today, a moral dilemma, not a moral question of what is right or wrong, but a dilemma is when there is a conflict between right and right, between wrong and wrong, and between right and wrong. And that's the unbelievably confusing era we are living in today. Because as humanity walks on the path of Hashem, and as we look at generations before us and how they reacted in their era, we must now start to ask the same questions. We cannot be only afraid for ourselves. We also have to be, as Jacob was, if you read into the word distressed, as modern day rabbis are doing, and particularly here I refer to the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. He above all challenged all our ideas to look at this and say, let us look at it from a moral point of view. So there is a right course of action and a wrong one. Two duties conflict. And what do we do when our two duties conflict? We make a decision. It's right or it's wrong. But a moral dilemma is something terrible because there is no right answer. It is cases of conflict between right and wrong, as I said, or wrong and wrong. And whatever we do, the fallout, there's going to be harsh criticism out, as there is today. And if I may just be so bold as to mention, in fact, our main moral dilemma today, we as Jewish people, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I know, because I've spent years working with both the Palestinians and Israelis, that the IDF is one of the most moral armies in the world. They even drop leaflets to come and bomb. But even with the most good intentions, tragic mistakes happen. And often there are people on both sides out of that moral parameter. No nation is 100% perfect. Of course, every nation, every religion has its extremes of right and left, has its the people who justify anything and the people who question anything and the people who just don't believe. So just to conclude, this has even come up, by the way, in earlier times, this discussion that we're having. The Talmud Yerushalayim describes such a case where a fugitive who was running from the Romans, Bar Kokhshev, takes refuge in the town of Lod. The Romans surround the town, saying, "Hand over the fugitives or we will kill you all." Rabbi Ben Levi persuades the fugitive to give himself up. Here is a complex case. This is not a simple right and wrong, as by the way apartheid was, majority black, minority white. That is not the case at all today in our country, in Israel, or in a future Palestine. But here, Rabbi Levi acts in accordance strictly with halakha, and he gets the fugitive to give himself up, and the fugitive, one of our own, one of his own, is killed. No problem? Yes. Because even in that era, Prophet Eliyahu says to him in one of his famous words and poems, and he says, addressing this instant, yes, it might have been halakha, but where you would rather sacrifice one life than a whole tribe. But he says, let's question it. Is this way of the fire? And that I love about Judaism, that we have many different streams, we have many different ideas, we have many different arguments. In fact, perhaps that is our greatest tradition of all, where both Abraham and Moses argued and questioned Hashem. And I'd like to conclude with saying that conflict is inherently tragic. Jacob in this parasha finds himself trapped in such a conflict. On the one hand, he ought not to allow himself to be killed. On the other, he ought not to kill anyone else, his brother or the collateral. To one of the other. This seems so complicated. Shows us to we are all faced with today. Shabbat Shalom.